The cast of Star Trek The Next Generation had made their successful leap to the big screen. Although Generations met with a mixed reception, its follow-up First Contact was a solid hit. It satisfied longtime fans, casual moviegoers, critics, and met with box office success. As Deep Space Nine and Voyager continued their successful runs on television, Paramount soon got the ball rolling on a third big screen outing for Captain Picard and the Enterprise. Having made a hit Star Trek movie in First Contact, Paramount was keen to repeat the success with the 9th Star Trek film. Paralleling the original series cast movies though, the Paramount executives aimed for a more light-hearted and fun movie, in contrast to the darker First Contact. They sought to replicate the success of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, at the time the most successful of the Star Trek movies, as it too was a more light-hearted romp which followed more darker, grittier movies. Once again, the task of conceiving this new movie fell to Rick Berman, who soon approached Michael Piller. Piller had worked as a writer-producer on Star Trek since The Next Generation's 3rd season, and is credited with turning that show around from the chaos of its first 2 years and forging the show into the success it became. He then went on to co-create and run Deep Space Nine and Voyager. However, by Voyager's 2nd season, after years of tireless work, he chose to move on from Star Trek, remaining on only as an executive consultant. The prospect of returning to the franchise to pen his first feature film script was enticing. Previously, Berman had approached Piller for the movie that became First Contact, the plan being for Piller and duo Brannon Braga and Ronald D. Moore to develop their own independent ideas, and the most well-liked would be the one that got made. But Piller wasn't keen on this competitive development style, and so he declined. Berman therefore assured Piller that he would be free to develop Star Trek IX entirely by himself. Berman suggested a number of ideas to get Piller started. In one idea, he proposed Captain Picard being replaced with some kind of alien duplicate, with Patrick Stewart in a dual role, but Piller wasn't a fan of this idea. Berman then proposed bringing back Data's brother Lore, but again Piller rejected the idea. Piller wanted instead to tell a true adventure story, inspired by Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. The primary source I'm using for this section of the video is Piller's own book Fade In, From Idea to Final Draft, The Writing of Star Trek Insurrection. Posthumously published online for free, I'd highly recommend it to anyone interested in the behind the scenes of Star Trek and anyone interested in screenwriting in general. Piller, in wonderfully crafted prose, provides an honest chronicle of his work on the movie, detailing his creative struggles as a writer and the practicalities of dealing with cast and studio demands, as well as the realities of production. It's a must-read as far as I'm concerned. The core of Piller's idea for Star Trek IX came after an unsuccessful pitch for a TV pilot about the impact of the first television sets in 1950s America. His idea was rejected as the executives at NBC didn't think the often sought-after demographic of the young 18 to 25-year-olds would be interested in such historical subject matter. Piller, frustrated over this obsession with the younger demographic, suddenly struck upon an idea: the obsession with youth. Looking young, feeling young, and that's when Piller came up with the concept of doing a Fountain of Youth story with this new Star Trek movie. His first treatment for the film was titled Star Trek Stardust, and would see Picard sent into an unexplored, difficult-to-navigate region of space called the Briar Patch, to confront an old friend of his who has been attacking Federation and Romulan vessels for some unknown reason. When Picard tracks his friend down, he uncovers a conspiracy by the Federation and Romulans to harvest an alien world for a regenerative substance at the cost of its native population. The treatment would see a flashback to Picard at the Academy and an encounter with Boothby, once again played by Ray Walston, a Romulan villain inspired by the Red Baron of the First World War, native aliens who could conjure psychic illusions, and to Picard, made young thanks to the planet's regenerative effects, waging a guerrilla war with his old friend against a Romulan mining operation. The first treatment didn't go down well with Rick Berman, who was concerned about the Fountain of Youth aspect of the story and Patrick Stewart's reaction to it. Patrick Stewart by this point had proven himself to be a leading man actor, having carried First Contact, where he also demonstrated his surprisingly deft handling of the action sequences. For Star Trek IX, Stewart was also an associate producer and had significant input on the script. The intention of making a more light-hearted adventure film appealed to him greatly, and he wanted to portray Picard as truly heroic. In his mind, during Generations and First Contact, he had played a haunted Picard enough, and wanted a change of pace for the character. Berman worried about the scenes in Pillar's treatment in which Picard becomes young again, saying, "You're telling our lead actor he's an old man." Berman also suggested making Data the colleague and friend Picard is sent to retrieve. Pillar obliged, reworking his treatment to downplay the Fountain of Youth aspect, instead making the planet the source of an ore used for various medical treatments which the Federation is in short supply of. He also introduced a crazed Data attacking Federation and Romulan ships, forcing Picard to seemingly kill Data, but is eventually resurrected in the third act. The Red Baron Romulan villain was also reworked into a more Errol Flynn type swashbuckler who fights a climactic sword duel with Worf. This treatment didn't go down well with the head of Paramount and was disliked by Patrick Stewart immensely. Stewart felt the treatment repeated too many elements already seen in The Next Generation, such as Romulan villains, going after a MacGuffin substance, and he also objected to the way Data was used, saying that Brent Spiner's iconic character was barely in the film as audiences would expect to see him. In a follow-up meeting between Rick Berman and Patrick Stewart, where they discussed his issues with the treatment, Berman offhandedly said, "You know, Patrick, we were once talking about this planet being some kind of fountain of youth. We'd even worked out a story in which everyone on the ship gets younger." Berman barely finished his sentence before Stewart responded with great enthusiasm saying, "Yes, the fountain of youth. Everyone is fascinated by youth culture. What a splendid idea." Berman then said, "To be honest, Patrick, we put the story aside because I was worried about you. I thought you'd have a problem getting younger during the movie because it might make Picard seem old." Patrick Stewart then replied, "That's very kind of you to consider my feelings, darling, but I really have no problem with that at all. Sounds like great fun." Pillar, happy to return to his originally intended Fountain of Youth story, went about writing another treatment which would combine the best elements of the first two drafts and take on board the various notes from Paramount and Stewart. The Romulans were removed from the story entirely, and instead a new alien race, the Soni, later named the Sona, were introduced in the script. As Pillar wrote, he was given more notes from other cast members such as Brent Spiner to iron out more character and plot logic issues. The native aliens named the Baku went from telepathic illusion-creating people to appearing like children due to the planet's effects, and finally to adults closely resembling humans. The telepathic powers were reworked into a sensory ability which seemed to slow down time. One of the Baku, named Angie, would also become a love interest for Picard, and Data would form a bond with a child named Artem. The writing continued with Pillar taking on more notes from those involved, including Ira Steven Behr, who Pillar asked to read his first draft of the script. Eventually the script got to a place most people were happy with, and preparation for the movie's shoot began. Jonathan Frakes, having impressed Paramount with his work on First Contact, landed the director's chair again for the film. Joining the cast was Academy Award-winning actor F. Murray Abraham as the villain Ruafu, Donna Murphy as Angie, later renamed to Anij, and Anthony Zerbe as Admiral Dougherty. As pre-production got underway, several titles were suggested for the movie, including Star Trek Sacred Honor, Star Trek Rebellion, and Star Trek High Treason, among others. Eventually, they settled on Star Trek Insurrection. Much of Insurrection was shot at Paramount Studios, reusing the Enterprise sets built for First Contact, with the transporter room, sickbay, crew quarters, and Troy's office all being redresses of sets from Star Trek Voyager. The new sets which were built included the Sona ship interiors, as well as pieces of the holoship and collector array. However, the body shop set was a redress of the Kyrian Museum set from Star Trek Voyager's Living Witness, and the caves were reused and expanded from Deep Space Nine. For the Baku planet, the production moved to Kings Canyon National Park in California, which included the Sierra Nevada mountain range and coast of Lake Sherwood for the Baku village, where a large outdoor set was built designed by Herman Zimmerman. Other outdoor scenes were shot at various national parks and lakes throughout California. Some of the mountain locations were only accessible via helicopter, with some of the ranges reaching 10,000 feet above sea level. This necessitated a medic with oxygen on standby should the altitude prove too much for any cast and crew. For the visual effects of the film, the production couldn't use industrial light and magic as they had done consistently since Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. This was because ILM was busy at the time on Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace. Instead, the production split the work between Santa Barbara Studios and Blue Sky VIFX. Although Santa Barbara made use of the Enterprise E model built by ILM for First Contact, the visual effects houses made use of almost entirely CG effects for the new spaceships and backgrounds. This included all of the Sona ships, holoship, collector array, Baku planet, Briar Patch, and a number of shots of the Enterprise itself. Just like with Star Trek First Contact, composer Jerry Goldsmith stepped in to score the movie. Like his previous scores, Goldsmith brought back the main march and Klingon themes originally written for Star Trek the Motion Picture. For the Baku, Goldsmith created new pieces which heavily featured harps, strings, and woodwinds for a more peaceful pastoral theme. For many of the action sequences involving the Sona, Goldsmith also mixed in synth pieces into the music, as he was fond of doing by this point in his career. After the first cut of the movie came together, Paramount held a test screening for the film. Although it didn't score poorly, the lukewarm reception from audiences was below expectations for a Star Trek film. Therefore, cuts had to be made. One scene which was cut involved a cameo from Armin Shimmerman's Quark and Max Grodenchik's Rom. Much of Picard's character arc was cut back in the following version of the film as well, and the ending was also retooled. The original ending saw Ruwafu ejected from the collector array into the planet's rings, where he was rapidly de-aged to death. However, this wasn't deemed punchy enough, so a new, more explosive ending was shot, where Picard is rescued from the collector at the last minute, and Ruwafu is engulfed in an explosion. After 2 years of hard work, the final cut of the film was locked, and Star Trek Insurrection was ready for release on the 11th of December 1998. Those most familiar with my other videos on this channel will likely already know my general opinion of Star Trek Insurrection. While it's certainly entertaining for the most part and boasts some strong sequences, for me it's comfortably my least favourite Star Trek movie. In general, the strong production values of First Contact are maintained for Insurrection. The production design, cinematography and direction are all top notch. At least that's the case for the scenes aboard the ships and in space. On the Baku planet, it's a bit of a mixed bag. While Herman Zimmerman's outdoor set is certainly impressive, when the action moves away from the village, the other locations seem a bit too familiar to Star Trek. Perhaps it's because I'm from the Scottish Highlands, but a lot of these locations kind of blur together into generic hills and grassland. While there are some great views later on in the mountains, I feel like the cinematography should have made more of an effort to Lord of the Rings it up, for lack of a better term. What's also a little inconsistent are the visual effects this time around. Santa Barbara and Blue Sky really created some fantastic work for the film. Many of the outer space sequences look gorgeous, with the fully CG ships seamlessly placed alongside miniatures, with a space battle sequence in the middle of the film which looks spectacular. However, there are some other shots and elements which don't work quite as well. The CG Sona ships look great across the board, but the Enterprise can often look like it's made out of plastic, and the Holo ship really doesn't hold up well at all. The rushed delivery of the final rescue sequence seems to have impacted the final result of the visual effects, with over-the-top motion blur and some odd compositing issues as well. The quality of the visual effects is nothing remotely as poor as the work seen in The Final Frontier. In fact, at times Santa Barbara and Blue Sky can match the standard of ILM, but at other times the shots can come across as looking more like TV quality. Jerry Goldsmith delivers another great score with Insurrection, easily one of his best Star Trek scores, which in my opinion surpasses his work on First Contact. The new rendition of the iconic main march seems to have even more power and grandeur behind it this time, and the score also features some brilliant action cues throughout. The standout tracks of the score though are easily the ones surrounding the Baku. They are absolutely gorgeous pieces of music, with New Sight in particular being one of my favourite tracks. While the Baku are stunningly represented in the music, unfortunately the same can't be said for the Baku in terms of the writing or visuals. They are just so fundamentally boring as a culture and as characters. Everything about them just comes across as totally bland. They look exactly the same as humans, their costumes are all beiges and browns, and none of the Baku characters have any truly distinct or memorable personalities. I often forget that this character is in the film entirely. Even their time-slowing abilities don't do enough to really make the audience interested in the Baku, and this is a fundamental problem with the film. The drama of the plot rests almost entirely on the plight of the Baku, and if the viewer doesn't really have much investment in them, it's hard to really care about them. Because of this, there's kind of a knock-on effect with the other elements in the movie. The regular cast are all terrific. It's frankly a joy when the film cuts back to the Enterprise and we get to see Riker and Geordi bouncing off each other with some fun, mid-battle banter. Even the minor bridge crew characters who we've never seen before manage to make a real impression. The humour in the movie works very well, especially at the start when Picard is on another diplomatic mission, and later when Worf and Picard have to apprehend Data. But when placed next to the boring Baku, these jokes suddenly seem out of place, causing a bizarre tonal whiplash. The pacing of the second act never quite finds its groove, feeling sluggish in certain places and rushed in others. The real weakness of the film, though, concerns Picard's character arc. After reading Michael Piller's book on writing Insurrection, I better understand what he was going for in terms of a narrative theme, but those small cuts made after the test screening seem to have distorted his creative intentions. Picard's arc was originally supposed to be about clutter, for lack of a better word. Picard finding his life too busy and cluttered, hence why he finds the living in the moment calm of the Baku so enticing. But in the final cut of the film, it comes across more like a technology versus nature theme. As I outlined in my original video essay on the film, I feel like this theme is far too simplistic and lets down Star Trek's core ethos. Picard even laments at the start of the film,
"Can anyone remember when we used to be explorers?"
Which is why I find the later line,
"But where can warp drive take us, except away from here?"
being framed as a wise and insightful remark which appeals greatly to Picard, quite baffling. Previously in First Contact, we saw and learned how transformative the invention of warp drive was for humanity, and how Cochrane recognised the utopia his invention could usher in, despite his initial desire for nothing more than money and fame.
It is one of the pivotal moments in human history, Doctor. You get to make first contact with an alien race, and after you do, everything begins to change.
It unites humanity in a way that no one ever thought possible when they realize they're not alone in the universe. Poverty, disease, war, they'll all be gone within the next 50 years.
But where can warp drive take us, except away from here?
Which is why Insurrection coming along and showcasing the Baku's low-tech way of life as a better alternative is very strange to me. I understand that wasn't the creative intention of the original script, but that's how it comes across in the final film. Outside of the Baku, though, F. Murray Abraham's Ruafu is gloriously over the top and a real scene stealer from the more subdued Admiral Dougherty. Abraham has since said how much fun he had making the film, and loved playing Ruafu, and this very much comes through in his performance. In general, I do think the Sona are very successful as villains. Their design is very unique, their history of having conquered two other races whom they now treat as slaves is visually very well communicated, and their ships and weapons frankly look really cool. The third act, where we're largely off the planet's surface and following our main cast, is a huge step up from the preceding act. I feel like this is where Insurrection properly comes alive, but unfortunately it's too little too late. Every time I rewatch the movie, I feel like it only just gets going by this point, only to finish about 30 minutes later. I don't hate Insurrection, in fact I'm not even sure I'd call it a straight up bad movie. As I said, it's watchable, even thrilling in places. It has a great beginning and an even better end, but it's a shame the majority of the movie gets bogged down in these bland characters and rather dull narrative themes. The weakness of the film is not at all the result of any kind of incompetence or apathy toward the franchise, in fact quite the opposite. It's obvious there was a genuine effort to make a great Star Trek movie here. It's just a shame that in this particular instance, the stars simply didn't align for Star Trek Insurrection. Upon release, Star Trek Insurrection was met with a decidedly mixed critical and audience reception. Some named it the best Star Trek movie of the TNG era, while others labelled it easily the worst. After the triumph of First Contact, though, the general consensus was one of disappointment. This disappointment also extended to the box office. The film grossed $117 million against a budget of somewhere between 60 and 70 million. While not a flop, this fell short of the gross of First Contact, and on a larger budget, this gross was quite underwhelming for the studio. In Michael Piller's Fade In, he describes how, during an early screening for the film, he overheard two audience members behind him saying with a shrug after the movie had finished, "Well, it's an odd one," in reference to the often held belief that even-numbered Star Trek movies are good and odd-numbered Star Trek movies are bad. In his book, Piller recalls thinking, 2 years of my life reduced to an odd number. While the reception of the film no doubt stung for all those involved, the next Star Trek movie, an even-numbered entry, wasn't to be the assumed success those who subscribed to this rule were hoping for. Thank you for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my patrons or my YouTube members, where you can see videos early as well as some other exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.